give you a really inspiring and relaxing morning together. Hopefully you'll leave this morning feeling a little bit like you've been on a miniature retreat. Hopefully you'll laugh a little bit, and we'll pray together in a lot of different ways. And the first thing I want to mention is that learning how to pray and keeping it up and finding different ways to pray, probably the most important thing we can ever do with our lives. We all do really important things. Children, you're doing very important things. Grown-ups, grandparents, we do really good stuff all day long. But learning how to pray and kind of exploring new ways, the most important thing we can do. And in fact, Pope Francis, he gets this reputation for being pretty chill, but he can be a scold. And there was one Wednesday audience when he actually wagged his fingers at parents and said, "Mother, Father, teach your children how to pray." He said he'd been going around and meeting children, Catholic children, who didn't even know how to say the sign of the cross. And so he was scolding parents and teach them how to say the sign of the cross. So I know we're a really wonderfully mixed group. Some of you are children, some of you are older, getting to be adults. We've got parents of young children, parents of children who've left the house. There may even be people here who have never been parents. This is okay. The idea is that we are responsible for cultivating our prayer life. We're not, you don't just sit there and all of a sudden you have a mystical experience. You have to work on it. It's a skill that you can get better at. And that's the good news too. Some people say, well, I don't know how to pray, and it's embarrassing, and I would never pray with my spouse. That would just be awkward. But you can get better at it. It's just a skill that you get better at, and it's a gift too. Primarily, it's a gift. So we're going to work on it today, and we're going to ask for the gift for prayer. That's one of the most basic things you can do. If you don't know how to pray, you feel like it's going to be awkward, just ask. Just ask the Lord. It's a gift. So, the day that Pope Francis said that, actually, it was pretty funny. It was the very same day that my book was delivered to me. It just got off the presses. And so when he was scolding, parents, teach your children how to pray. And the name of my book is Pray With Me, 7 Simple Ways to Pray With Your Children. I kept it, come on, Pope Francis, say, and there's a new book in the United States. Paul promised that you'd learn from me, but I also like to learn from you. And I really love to find out the ways that you already pray. With your children or by yourself, how do you already pray? What are some of your favorite go-to ways? Or maybe something you've heard that other people do that you've always thought, oh, I should really do that. So, how do you already pray? What sorts of things do you already do?
Before bed.
Before bed, that's a perfect time. First thing in the morning, right before a meal. Oh, studying for tests. Has there ever been a more strenuous prayer? What else?
When they get something wrong or when they're in trouble.
You pray with your child when they've gotten into trouble? That's fantastic. Praying with the, unless it's like, dear Lord, help me not smite this horrible child. But that instinct to pray in times of trouble, what a habit to cultivate.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What else? Other ways do you pray? Maybe some.
Yep.
That is a great prayer trigger when you hear an ambulance, you hear a siren. A friend of mine who lives in downtown Milwaukee, I teach with her. Her mom lives in Brookfield, and she was at her mom's house for dinner, and they heard a siren, and her mom, who's in her 80s, said, oh, I'm going to say a prayer. And my friend was like, oh yeah, that's so great, except that where I live, if I said a prayer every time I hear a siren, I wouldn't get anything done. What other ways do you pray?
Silence on the way to work, driving to work.
Silence. Silence, just turning everything off, even for a few minutes. That's a beautiful way to pray. And believe it or not, children can pray with silence. Also, sometimes if it's just 10 seconds, that's golden. But you can let it grow. I've got a whole chapter about silence. Beautiful.
Water seems to trigger something with me, by a lake or a beautiful sunset.
Oh.
outside.
Appreciating beauty, especially water, seems to be very fruitful for you.
My
That's
mother
great.
used to make us pray before we went anywhere in the car, and I can't say I do that.
Every
She
time
used to
when you
every
get in
time.
the car, you say a prayer, Our Lady of the Way, pray for us, something like that, yes? What else?
And we know other people are in need.
When you know other people are in need, prayers of intercession. What
I
else?
like to pray in the morning because I'll get busy and forget.
Yeah.
I don't like to stay up at night remembering my prayers, so I go to sleep when I go to sleep.
Time of day is important. Doing it in the morning before the day takes you away from it, and then at night you're too tired. It's Saint Ignatius of Loyola also said that the most important if your day is crazy and you forget to do all the other prayers that you meant to do, the one thing that you cannot forget to do is examine your day at the end of the day. And but a friend of mine, she felt so bad. She had 4 little babies, and she was like, "Oh, I just fall asleep every night." And I said, "You know, you can examine your day the next morning too." She said, "Oh." Oh, because you will always fall asleep at night. Yeah, you can do that. You can change the rules a little bit. I think that sleep that you're getting at the end of the day, I think that's a gift. I think that's also a prayer. This is wonderful. You already pray in so many ways, and you have different prayer triggers, things that happen during the day that automatically remind you to pray, like a siren or a meal or getting up or going to bed, going to work. That's really important to build into your day all these prayer triggers. And there are so many different ways that you're praying, with memorized prayer, with silence, with just spontaneous prayer. God, this is so beautiful. These are all wonderful ways to pray. And so I guess that's the end of the talk, then. You already but the idea is that the reason why we're coming together is to encourage each other, encourage one another, and build each other up, as St. Paul says in Thessalonians, to remember to keep praying and maybe to find a new way to pray. Maybe the way you've been praying is feeling a little stale. So you'll leave here with some new ideas. The most important thing that all of these ways of praying and the new ways that we might try this morning, they all have to connect with your heart. If you're not connecting your prayer with the heart, it's not becoming part of who you are. And so every way that we pray, we have to make sure that it's living inside our heart. In fact, when I first wanted to find out how to pray better, I had this vague idea. I'd like to be really good at praying, but I kind of don't know how. So I went and I looked up in the catechism, what's the definition of prayer? And I expected all sorts of paragraphs and footnotes and quotations, and there is that. But the beginning of one of the chapters says, prayer is the life of the new heart. And I thought, what a strange definition. Prayer is the life of the new heart. The new heart. Do you want a new heart? Where's your heart? Where's your heart? Right there. Then a new heart. And I thought of how many times during the day, any given day, I feel tired. And I feel like this is all the same. And tomorrow I'm going to have to do this again. And I don't know if I can keep doing this, if it's going to last for however many years. When you feel like nothing is ever going to change, maybe you're praying for somebody who is really heavy on your heart, and you're almost in despair. Nothing, it's never going to change. Nothing's ever going to get better. But prayer is the antidote to that. It's the life of the new heart. Who doesn't want to feel refreshed every single second of the day. Prayer can do that for us. And in fact, if prayer doesn't do that for us, we need to keep trying. We need to ask the Lord to give us a new heart, to bring us closer. I saw your beautiful statue. Right behind the altar is the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He knows what it's like to have a heart that's been pierced and bloody, and he can set it back on fire. That's the Sacred Heart. We've got the thorns, and we've got the blood, and we have the fire. He can give us the life of the new heart every moment we ask for it. That's what prayer is. It's part of, too, of what Pope Francis asks us to do. Pope Francis says that he invites all Christians everywhere at this very moment to a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ, or at least an openness to letting him encounter them. And he asks us to do this every single day, to have a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ every day. Every day. This is Pope Francis again, wagging his finger at us. We have to do this every day. So connecting prayer to our heart is this personal encounter with Jesus Christ. It's an encounter so overwhelming that you'll want to tell the whole world. That's how Bishop Barron describes the new evangelization. That the new evangelization is about an encounter so overwhelming that you want to tell the whole world. It is an encounter with Jesus Christ. He's talking about how we're supposed to go out into the world, but it's also a description of prayer. In fact, I once was giving a talk on prayer, and afterwards a gentleman came up to me, and he was in his 80s, and his eyes were just on fire, and he came up and he said, "I have to tell you about my life." It's like, whoa, this is going to take a little while. Let's sit down. He had an encounter so overwhelming that he had to tell me. And so we sat down and he told me about it, that he grew up just after World War II, and his dad took off about the second he found out that his mom was pregnant. He left her a single mother, and she really wanted this gentleman to go to Catholic school, so she worked 3 jobs to put him through Catholic school. 3 jobs in the 40s and 50s to put him through Catholic school, which meant that she wasn't home a lot. And now you could tell when I met him, a really good-looking gentleman, such sparkly eyes, he's Irish. He got into a lot of trouble. He had a very active sense of adventure. And his mom was always worried about him, and he was always getting pulled into the principal. And one day, it was in 1st grade, he told me, that one of the sisters, the religious sisters who taught him, looked him straight in the eye and said, "God is always with you." She said it again, "God is always with you." She didn't say it like a threat. She just was letting him know, God is always with you. And at that particular moment, it didn't make much of a difference. But he said years later, he was in middle school, and he and his buddies were hanging out at the train yard, and because that's what you did in the 50s, I guess, I don't know. And one of the freight trains started to pull out for wherever it was going, and there was an empty car. And his friend said, "Let's get on it." And this is exactly the kind of thing that he would have done every single day. He would have been the one to say, "Let's get on it." But at that very moment, he remembered what that sister had told him. And he knew that God was with him that instant. He had a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ. And he had the strength to say to his buddies, "I'm going to go home and wait for my mom. You guys have fun, whatever you're going to do. I'm going to go home and wait for my mom." And I love that story because it shows that this personal encounter with Jesus Christ is very practical. It did something for him. Not just theoretical, not just something that you talk about when you're at church. It made him make a different decision. A healthier decision that no one would have expected him to make. This guy was always in trouble. But he made a different decision because he had a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it was an adult who reminded him of that relationship. And it was a gift of God that at that perilous moment he remembered. So, sharing our relationship with Jesus Christ and being open to those moments where we have an encounter with him changes our lives in very practical ways. That's why Pope Francis insists that we work for this every single day, that we ask for it every single day. These are three of my favorite reasons why we should pray. It's hard for a lot of you to see it, so I'll make sure I read this. First of all, prayer is practical. It's so practical. You don't have to plug anything in. You don't need a password. You don't need a login. You don't need any stuff at all. It's so practical. And in fact, if we were to be thrown off, we've had so many examples of people who have to leave their homes with absolutely nothing lately in our own country and in Puerto Rico and Syria. Just look around the world. People are having to leave their homes in an instant with nothing but the clothes on their back. They can bring prayer with them. And in fact, Jesus tells us in the Bible that that's exactly what the most important thing is. Remember when he's with Mary and Martha? And Martha is very busy about her work, which, by the way, isn't a bad thing. I'm pretty sure that after this all happened, they all had lunch or whatever Martha was making. So, but here's the difference. Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to him, and Jesus tells Martha, Mary has the one thing necessary. The one thing really necessary is sitting and listening to Jesus, having that personal encounter with Jesus Christ. And it shall not be taken from her. We can pray while we're busy about our many things, but Martha had taken her eyes off of Christ and instead was looking right at Mary and was feeling bitterness towards her. That's the difference. Mary was having a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. Martha was having a bitter encounter with her sister. That's the difference. We can certainly pray while we're working as long as we've got our eyes on Jesus Christ. It's the one thing necessary. Pope John Paul II said that if you want to be holy, I'm not going to make you raise your hand. We should all want to be holy. That's the purpose of our life. That's why your church, I got in there and I saw that the ceiling above the sanctuary is clouds and the heavens, that reminds you visually. You walk into the church, you go, that's where I'm going. That's my goal. I'm going to live in heaven forever. And it made me think of how my school, like when you walk into my school, does it remind students what their goal is? Yeah, it's got college stuff plastered all over. This school is to get you to your goal, which is college. And then I thought, how much more refreshing is it to walk into a building where you know where your real goal is? I mean, college is good. College first, then heaven, I would have to say to my students. That's our goal. We want to be holy. And Pope John Paul II said that if you want to be trained in holiness, you have to train yourself in prayer first and foremost. Training in holiness must be training in prayer. That doesn't bother me at all, by the way. Talk all she wants. I'm Italian. I've never made it through a conversation without anybody interrupting me. So my students know they have to give me a perimeter for where my hands can go. So it's the one thing necessary. If you want to be holy, which we do, pray. If you want the most important thing, if you have to leave your house right this second, what do you grab? You grab your prayer. And the great thing is that can't be destroyed in any natural disaster. It's the most important thing we have. If we were on a desert island, we would need to bring prayer. And that's the truth. God can do anything for us if we have Him, if we have our encounter with Him. What's really nice, too, about prayer is that we can do it in the midst of everything else that we're doing. Think of all the, in fact, here, just shout out, I'll time you to see, tell me things that you have to do during any given day. All right, just shout them out. I'll count to see when I get to about 20 things. Let's see how long it takes you. Ready? Go.
Work,
Laundry,
Food shopping.
Eat.
grocery store,
Drink coffee.
kids,
drive the kids to school.
Get gas.
All right, that took 7 seconds or so for you to come up with 20 different things. I like the one that's just kids. What do you have to do? Did you shout something out? I didn't hear you. What do you have to do during the day? Every day. What do you do? I'm putting you on the spot. School. Yeah. That's your job right now. Yeah, that's your job from God right now is to go to school.
enjoy it.
What's that?
I said enjoy it.
Yes, enjoy it. That's one of those moments where adults talk to children and they each have no idea what they're saying. Take advantage of this. All right. All those things that we mentioned, driving, eating, showering, going to school, taking care of, doing dishes, these are things we have to do anyway. The great thing about prayer is it's so practical, you can do it while you're doing all of those things. The difference between my washing the dishes and it being just washing the dishes and my praying is if I think about God. St. Teresa said it's a simple glance turned towards heaven. If I just make this be an encounter with Jesus Christ, it's prayer. Say, hey Jesus, I'm doing the dishes. Again, and I hate it. That's a prayer. Hey Jesus, I'm doing the dishes, and my friend's daughter had a seizure last night. Can you take my dishes and turn it into a prayer on her behalf? The things that we do already can be turned into prayer simply by glancing towards the Lord and telling Him what we're doing. He already knows what we're doing, but He loves to hear us tell Him about it. It's like when your children come home from school, or you guys, our children, you come home from school, what's one of the first things you do? How was your day? Right. You want to know how their day went. Do you get asked that a lot? And if they just say, fine, you're a little disappointed. Well, I'm glad it was fine. I'm glad you didn't break all the bones in your body, but could you elaborate on that a little bit? Jesus just wants to know what we're doing. He wants to encounter us. That was the other part of Pope Francis's quotation. Or at least an openness to letting Him encounter us. Prayer is us turning our glance towards Jesus, and it's letting Him look at us. Let me see what you're doing. So prayer is so practical. We do it all the time. You can offer up the things that you do during the day. Sometimes, and take one of those prayer triggers. You hear a siren, you're waking up. Even things like tying your shoe, putting the key in the ignition. My prayer trigger I've chosen is before I hit send on an email. Because I hit that button hundreds of times every day. And if I choose that, this will remind me to pray. And I can just say, Jesus, I'm hitting send now. But it can also remind me to pray for the person I'm writing to. That has saved many inappropriate send. Like something I was writing in anger really quickly. Wait, it was a prayer. But let me back up and change that email a little bit. So picking these things during the day that are prayer triggers can help you have this encounter with Jesus Christ. And let Him encounter you. Let Him in on your day. That's all He wants. He loves each one of us like we're the only one He ever created. That's all He wants is to be a part of our day. My second favorite reason that we should pray all the time and learn how to pray better is because it's so personal. Like I said, Jesus just wants to be a part of our day. Sometimes I think of social media, like Twitter, that in some ways it seems, when it first came out, I was like, what is this thing? And I learned that, at the time that I was looking at, the number one, the person with the most Twitter followers was, that singer, the really, sure, we'll say it was a woman with the blonde hair,
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, that's it. Oh, phew. Yeah, Lady Gaga. I don't know what color her hair is. Sure, blonde. Taylor Swift had millions of followers. millions of people who would check their phones to see what she was doing. And that just stupefied me. I thought, oh. I'm sorry. It's my Jiminy Cricket right here. It bewildered me because, and I thought people should have something better to do than to find out what shoes Taylor Swift is wearing today or where she's going for lunch. These are the things she was tweeting in 140 characters or less. She was letting people know what she was doing all day long, and millions of people were finding that important enough to take out their phone. And it made me kind of angry. But then one day I had an insight. Wait a second. That's just like prayer. That's a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. It's like Jesus has his phone, and each one of us is the only one he follows. He only has one person. Of course, he has an infinite number of phones, but we're the only ones. And he waits all day long for us to tweet him something. And then we finally do. Let's say you're brushing your teeth. That's a great prayer trigger. You get 2 minutes to brush your teeth, and you say, Jesus, this is for you. And you can just let your mind wander, or you can be thinking about someone in particular. It's this practical kind of prayer. And so you just tweet it to Jesus. Jesus, I'm brushing my teeth. And Jesus goes crazy. Thank you for telling me I love your teeth. I remember when I made your teeth, first the little baby teeth, and then those fell out, and then I made your big teeth, then you had a cavity. And he just wants to be part of our every moment. It's so personal. Prayer is so personal. And in fact, if we don't tweet, if we don't let Jesus know what we're doing, we've lost that opportunity. No one can do this for us. We have to turn our glance towards Jesus Christ. When I tell children this, they get excited because their lives are very scripted by adults. Someone tells you when to go to school, where to go to school, how much homework to do. Maybe they get to help choose their activities. But parents mold their lives, which is totally appropriate. But they feel it sometimes, especially as they get to be, in middle school. And so when they know that this glance towards heaven is entirely under their control, and in fact, if they don't do it, it just gets lost, they get pumped up, like, all right, I can do, this is something in my life that I can do. When I turn my locker combination, I get to pray. This is something that I can do, and it makes them feel kind of cool. But often when I tell parents, adults about this, we tend to feel a little ashamed. Sometimes we have this instinct like, oh, but what I have to offer isn't all that impressive. God doesn't want to know what I'm doing here, or I'm not, maybe there's something that would be embarrassed to offer up because it's not our best side. If I had only finished my college degree, then I'd want to offer something up. I'm just doing dishes. All I do is dishes. Nobody else, if I don't do them, nobody else will do them. I do this day after day. We tend to feel embarrassed about what we have to offer. But prayer reminds us that the creator of the universe is intensely interested in everything that we do. We are personally connected with God. Remember, too, that Pope Francis said that another part of prayer, so it's turning our glance toward Jesus, having this personal encounter with Jesus Christ, but also letting Christ encounter us. And sometimes when we're most tired, when we're most defeated, and we're most bored, that's when prayer as Christ encountering us becomes really important. I remember when my brother was divorced. It was the first Christmas after he was divorced. His kids were ages 4 and 2. And I had a 2-year-old also, and it was the first Christmas after his divorce, and all of us, I'm one of 8 kids, we were all at my folks' house, and the cousins were all playing with each other, and his son Nick, the 2-year-old, and my daughter Claire, the 2-year-old, they were playing cars together. And all of a sudden, Nick just took one of the cars and he threw it, and of course it hit Claire in the forehead, and so she has a meltdown, and there are like 15 aunts and uncles right there, and everyone's like, Nick, cut it out, we don't do that, Claire, you're fine. You know, there's like a whole bunch of people managing the situation, but my brother wasn't in the room, and all of a sudden he heard Claire crying, and then Nick saying like, I didn't do it, or whatever, you know. And so my brother comes running in, he's like, what's wrong? I said, Matt, it's fine, we all got it. This is not, and he's like, no, what happened? Nick tossed the car, I hit Claire, she's fine. And he just kind of was taking everything in, and he started to cry. I'd never seen my brother cry in my life. And I went out in the hallway with him, and I was like, what is the problem? There's nothing wrong. And he said, I am so tired. I am the disciplinarian, I am the friend, I am the chauffeur, I am the cook, I change their diapers, I have to play with them. He's like, I do it all alone, and I am so tired. And I think about that experience when I know that we need to let Jesus look at us. That time when Pope Francis says, let Christ encounter you, when you're most tired and you think you're most alone and nobody notices what you do, that's when you just let Jesus look at you. That was why prayer is so personal. We can let Christ encounter us and feel that love. The last reason why I love prayer so much is because it's so powerful. I secretly want to be a superhero. I know that's that. I love it when people tell kids don't listen to this part, you can be anything you want. Well, kind of. Like, I'm never going to play in the NBA, all right? I would really like to do that, but I'm a 5'7" white woman, and it's never going to happen. So I really secretly would like to be a superhero. And prayer gives me a taste for that. Prayer is so powerful. When we share our heart's desires with the Lord, beautiful and wonderful things happen. Even when we're praying about a desperate situation that can't be fixed, like we're desperately sad, we really miss someone who's passed away, they're not going to come back to us, but we turn that into prayer, and our hearts become more like Jesus' heart. And the world will never be worse for that. We're praying for refugees in Syria that we will never know and we don't have any direct way to contact. Simply praying for them changes the world because it changes our hearts. There's a difference between somebody who vaguely reads a story about the Syrian refugees and then moves on with her day, and someone who reads a story about the Syrian refugees and takes a second to pray for that person. The world is different because that person prayed. Often our prayer will lead us to action, and it keeps getting on our heart, and it's the Holy Spirit asking us to find a way to do something about it. But just the mere instinct, the gift of praying, changes the world. It's no exaggeration to say that it changes the world. Jesus can do anything. God is all-powerful. God can save the world in any way He wants. He prefers to save the world with our help. That's how He prefers it. Think of the story of the loaves and the fishes. It occurs 6 times in the Gospels. Twice in Mark, twice in Matthew, once in Luke, and once in John. And the details change here and there. But it's in there 6 times. We've got to pay attention to this. And think about it in terms of prayer, right? So here are all the apostles. There are thousands of people. And in one account, Jesus has been teaching for 3 days. They don't have anything to eat. It's actually a humanitarian crisis. Because if they want something to eat, they have to go grow it, right? I mean, there's no 7-Eleven on the corner. So it's actually a dangerous situation. And the apostles get